Gulf Air 072, clear to land surface wind from 09 or 0 degree at 8 knots on the evening of August 23, 2000. Gulf Air Flight 072, an Airbus A320, was on its final approach to Bahrain International Airport, but what seemed like a standard approach soon turned. Critical Flight 072 aligned with the runway from a distance of 9 nautical miles, but the aircraft was nowhere near configured for landing. The pilots faced an urgent situation as their airspeed was out of control. Reaching 313 knots with the runway looming closer, they had to act fast to bring the aircraft under control. Will they succeed, or will this flight tragically end in disaster just minutes before reaching the runway? Join us as we dig into the story of Gulf Air Flight 072 on the afternoon of August 23, 2000. A Gulf Air Airbus A320 registered as A4EK began boarding in Cairo, Egypt, for Flight 072 to Bahrain. The crew for this flight was young and relatively inexperienced. In command was 37-year-old Captain Ian Shakib, joined by 25-year-old First Officer Khalaf al-Alawi. Captain Shakib, a Bahraini national, had around 4,400 flying hours, but only 86 of those were as pilot in command. Gulf Air pilots who had flown with the captain described him as responsible, knowledgeable, open to suggestions, happy, very helpful. Professional and sharp for this flight, he was the pilot, flying the first officer, and Omani was even newer, with just 608 flight hours. He initially failed his proficiency check in the A320, receiving marks of D on various aspects, including multiple landing procedures and engine failure procedures, after receiving additional training. He passed his proficiency check and began line training. Gulf Air pilots who had flown with him described him as timid, meek, mild, polite, shy, and reserved in social situations. For this flight, he was the pilot, monitoring on board. Flight 072 were 135 passengers and 6 flight attendants, bringing the total number of occupants to 143. The passengers included a diverse group of people from 17 different nationalities at 4:52 p.m. local time. With all checks completed, the pilots started the engines and the aircraft was pushed back from the gate. Flight 072 was delayed by 52 minutes due to an error that sent the pilots to the wrong gate, pushing their expected landing in Bahrain. Deeper into the hours of darkness upon reaching the runway, the pilots waited for clearance. After receiving it, they started accelerating down the runway, lifting off smoothly and climbing steadily into the evening sky as it left Cairo. Behind, as night fell over Arabia, the passengers settled in for the flight east to Bahrain by 7:21 p.m. Flight 072 was well into its descent and in contact with approach control in the city of Dammam on the coast of Saudi Arabia, across the strait from Bahrain, descending out of 14,000 aft and 30 nautical miles from the airport. The crew received permission to begin their approach, so creating these kind of videos takes a lot of time and energy, and sometimes I really need a break, and one of my favorite ways to unwind is by watching movies, but unfortunately, not all content is available here in the Netherlands on platforms like Netflix, and that's where today's sponsor, Private Internet Access, comes in. With private internet access, you can unlock content from all over the world by picking a server in a different location and in. This way, I can watch my favorite movie Top Guns from the U.S. library, even if it's not available in my own country. But there is more. Whenever you're browsing on an unprotected device, such as your phone, computer, or tablet, your device is transmitting a great amount of information out into the open, which can be viewed by various entities. Before reaching the intended website, private internet access can hide your IP address and safeguard your internet connection through an encrypted tunnel. This way, it shields your digital life from the eyes of those looking to exploit your private information. Private internet access is tried by millions of users and has an excellent rating on Trpilot. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, so it's absolutely Risk-free. Additionally, private internet access has a strict no-logs policy ensuring your data is never stored by using My. Link, you can grab an 83% discount on private internet access that's just $2.3 a month, and you get also 4 extra months completely for free. Use my link in the pinned comment or video description to get this special offer. Now back to the video. The captain acknowledged the clearance, which allowed them to navigate to the start of the approach for runway 12. This meant they needed to descend to 500 FT and then contact Bahrain approach control. For further instructions, he then turned to his first officer and instructed him to establish radio communication with Bahrain approach and to ask the controller for confirmation that they could expect to land on runway 12. Bahrain International Airport, situated on the northern coast of Bahrain, features a single runway. This runway measures 956 m in length and 60 m in width. It is equipped with high-intensity approach and runway lights to enhance visibility during landings, especially under low-visibility conditions. First Officer Alawi communicated with Bahrain approach and the controller, responded Ed, by clearing them for the approach and asking them to confirm that they were at 500 FT, typically Dammam. Instructed flights to descend to this altitude before being handed over to Bahrain. The controller wanted to verify this clearance, however the captain had a different understanding. Captain Shakib, believing they were cleared to 700 FT, instructed the first officer to relay this incorrect information to Bahrain. Approach, he complied, and the controller told the crew to continue their descent to 3,500 FT. In reality, they had been cleared to descend to this altitude as per. DAM's clearance of 3.5 approved. This misunderstanding led to a significant deviation from the intended flight path and their speed to increase as they needed to get down fast. As the flight crew conducted their approach checklist, the controller instructed them to descend further to 500 FT and report when established on the final approach course for the VDME instrument approach to runway 12. This approach required precise navigation and careful altitude adjustments at specific points. The V or VHF omnidirectional range is a radio beacon used globally, including at Bahrain Airport. It emits signals in all directions, helping pilots determine their position and stay on course. DME, or distance measuring equipment, provides a digital readout showing the distance to the V beacon. This allows pilots to monitor their distance from the beacon and make necessary altitude adjustments to ensure they are on the correct approach path to the runway. While VDME approaches can be challenging, especially in poor weather. The weather over the Gulf that night was clear with hardly a cloud in the sky. This meant that the usual difficulties like limited visibility or turbulence were not a factor, allowing the pilots to focus on their instruments without the added stress of navigating through clouds or rough air. For this approach, the pilots needed to fly towards the VR beacon on a heading of 181 degrees. They relied on their instruments to stay aligned with the beacon as they approached. By 7:25 p.m., flight 072 was aligned with the runway from a distance of 9 nautical miles, but their airspeed was out of control. Reaching 313 knots after a rapid descent in a standard VDME approach procedure, the aircraft should be stabilized and fully configured for landing by the final approach fix or FF 5 nautical miles from the runway. This means the landing gear should be down, flaps extended, and the correct airspeed maintained as they approached the final approach fix. The captain instructed the first officer to report that they were established on the V. The first officer radioed air traffic control, and Bahrain approach cleared them to conduct the VORDME approach and instructed them to contact Bahrain Tower as they descended further. The aircraft failed to lose sufficient speed and altitude, reaching 678 FT and 224 knots. When the captain instructed the first officer to set the flaps to position 1 and lower the landing gear immediately after that, flight 072 reached the approach fix, still nowhere near configured. The speed was 223 knots instead of 136 knots. The flaps were set to position 1 instead of full, and the altitude was 1,662 instead of 1,501. A successful landing seemed unlikely at this moment. At this point, standard operating procedures called for the pilots to make a missed approach, circle back, and try again. Instead, the captain announced visual with the airfield and switched from VDME approach procedures to visual approach procedures by disengaging the autopilot and flight director, although the auto throttles remained engaged by abandoning the stricter instrument-based VDME approach and switching to visual flight rules. He seemingly bought himself more time to configure the aircraft, but seconds later, it finally dawned on the captain that they weren't going to make it, realizing that a successful landing could not be achieved from that point in the approach. The captain requested clearance to conduct a 360-degree left turn, which the controller approved. He then ordered the first officer to set the flaps to position 2 in an attempt to reduce altitude and airspeed. The sea captain decided to perform the turn. This action was taken without briefing his first officer and lacked any valid operational necessity. The proper course of action would have been to level off, fly straight ahead, climb to 500 ft, and circle around for another attempt following the standard missed approach procedure for runway 2. The captain began turning the aircraft to the left, initiating the orbit at a distance of 9/10 of a nautical mile from the runway. As he did so, he called for flaps 3, then flaps full, bringing the aircraft into the proper landing configuration. However, the selection of flaps full was inappropriate. Flaps full is intended only for the final phases of flight, such as approach and landing, because it generates significant drag flaps. Full should not be used for maneuvering. During the turn, the captain could not maintain a consistent bank angle or pitch attitude. The aircraft's altitude fluctuated between 965 mft and 332 ft, above ground level, with the bank angle reaching a maximum of about 30 degrees. As the aircraft turned, it appeared very tight to the tower controller. He had never seen that kind of approach before, and even asked a colleague to take a look at 7:29 p.m. The captain leveled the aircraft's wings on a heading of about 212 degrees. At that moment, the aircraft was crossing the extended runway center line. Realizing their position, the captain remarked that they had overshot the runway. He then rolled the aircraft into a left turn, while instructing First Officer Al-Alawi to inform the controller that they were going around. The auto throttle was disengaged and takeoff gore around power was selected. Meanwhile, the controller instructed the crew to fly a heading of 3,000 deer and climb to 500 ft. The flaps were moved to position 3 during this time, and the landing gear was retracted as the aircraft crossed the runway. Wings level again, the oral flap. Overspeed warning sounded. The airspeed was 191 knots, exceeding the limit of 185 knots for flaps. In position 3, the aircraft was now flying toward the Gulf. To make matters worse, once they passed the runway, the lights of Bahrain Airport disappeared, leaving the pilots with only darkness, as the moonless night provided no visual references with the thrust in the toga position, and no visual horizon. The captain felt like they were climbing. However, this was deceptive. This was the moment when things went terribly wrong, as he pushed his side stick forward immediately. The aircraft's pitch decreased sharply from a nose-up to a nose-down attitude, and the airspeed increased rapidly as the aircraft descended through about 1,000 ft. The ground proximity warning system generated a sink rate warning, a signal for the pilot to pull up, but they didn't sink rate, pull up. The captain instructed to raise the flaps and then moved his side stick to a nose-up position. However, this nose-up command was not maintained. The aircraft continued to descend, and seconds later it plummeted into the Persian Gulf, killing all 143 passengers and crew on board. News of the crash spread quickly, shaking the entire Gulf region and beyond. At the accident site, some 4 kilometers northeast of the airport, rescue teams and divers sifted through debris under about 3 meters of water, searching for the bodies of the victims. When investigators reviewed the black boxes, they discovered that after the go-around was initiated, the aircraft climbed slightly before descending straight into the sea. The official report on the crash of Gulf Air Flight 072 was published by the Bahraini aviation authorities on July 10, 2002. The investigation revealed that the delay in departure combined with the pressures of night flying likely contributed to the cognitive overload experienced by the crew. This situation was exacerbated by the captain's inexperience with only 86 hours as pilot in command of the A320, still familiarizing himself with the aircraft systems. Detailed analysis of the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder revealed escalating confusion and miscommunication. The lack of a proper approach briefing and the hurried nature of the descent were crucial points leading to the disaster during the acceleration with toga power. In total darkness, the somatographic illusion likely caused Captain Shakib to perceive falsely that the aircraft was pitching up, leading him to apply a NOS down input. This action resulted in the aircraft descending into the sea. The incident underscores the importance of thorough and methodical training programs. Today, pilots undergo more comprehensive training that includes advanced simulations of complex scenarios including spatial disorientation and high-stress decision-making after the accident. The Emir of Bahrain declared 3 days of national mourning. Gulf Air retired the Flight 072 flight number and replaced it with Flight 070 for inbound flights from Cairo to Bahrain.